Under the clear autumn sky of North Conway, New Hampshire, a small peaceful town nestled between pine forests and mountain ranges, life moved slowly, calmly, as if nothing terrible could ever happen. Here people believed in kindness, in community, where everyone knew each other's name. To them, the idea of someone disappearing only happened on the news, in big cities full of danger and chaos. But one October day, that belief was brutally shattered when a 14-year-old girl left school and never came home. That girl was Abigail Hernandez. It all began like any other ordinary afternoon. School had just let out. Students streamed through the gates, chatting and saying goodbye at the bus stop or heading down familiar paths toward home. But Abigail, an adventurous girl, always eager to move, fiercely independent, decided to walk through the park instead of taking the bus. It wasn't a long way, just over a mile, and one she had walked hundreds of times. But as the sun began to set behind the trees, no one knew this well-worn trail would lead her straight into a living nightmare. Abigail, known to her friends as Abby, was a bright, energetic, and spirited young girl. Born on October 12, 1998, she was raised in a relatively happy home. Her mother, Xenia, worked as a nurse. Her father, Reuben, was a salesman. Though her parents divorced when she was in middle school, Abby remained close to both, especially her mom and older sister Sarah. As the youngest in the family, she was loved deeply, but she was never one to depend on others. She adored nature, had a passion for photography, and was an active member of her school's outdoor club, where she learned survival skills, hiked, and camped in the New Hampshire wilderness. Maybe it was this love for the outdoors that made Abby comfortable walking alone. She wasn't afraid of quiet roads or wooded corners. She believed the world was mostly good. She believed people, by default, were kind. But that innocence, so beautiful and so fragile, would make her the perfect target for a predator lurking in the shadows. In October 2013, Abby was looking forward to fall break and her upcoming 15th birthday. She was excited to go hiking with her friends and had just received a brand new pair of hiking boots from her mom. They were a bit tight, but she wore them to school anyway to break them in. That small detail, seemingly insignificant, would soon play a role in her fate. On October 9, 2013, after school ended, Abby said goodbye to her friends at the bus stop and walked off toward home. It was around 2:30 p.m. That was the last confirmed sighting of Abigail Hernandez alive and well. By 5 p.m., when Abby hadn't come home, her mother began to worry. Phone calls went unanswered. Her phone was off. At first, Xenia tried to stay calm. Maybe the phone had died, maybe Abby had stopped to visit someone. But by 7 p.m., when calls to friends turned up nothing, the fear set in. Xenia and her older daughter rushed to the police station and reported Abby missing. The disappearance shocked the town. Flyers were printed and plastered everywhere. Social media exploded with posts about Abby. Local news stations picked up the story. Search teams formed within hours. People asked, how could a girl like Abby, strong, smart, prepared, just vanish in a town this small? But what made it more terrifying was the complete silence. No ransom call, no witnesses, no security camera footage. Police searched roads, forests, lakes, parking lots, but found nothing. It was as if the town itself had swallowed her whole. National attention followed, along with speculation. Some said Abby ran away. Others suspected her boyfriend. A few even questioned the family. But those who knew her were certain Abby wouldn't leave her mother and sister behind. She wasn't that kind of girl. Each passing day chipped away at hope. The Hernandez family clung to every call, every potential lead. Then, nearly 2 months later, a strange thing happened. A handwritten letter appeared in their mailbox. It was from Abigail. She said she was alive, safe, and asked her mother not to worry. But she didn't say where she was or why she was gone. Rather than comfort, the letter brought more questions. If she was free, why not come home? If she was held captive, who made her write it? And why had the police found absolutely nothing, not even a strand of hair? North Conway was no longer a quiet town. It was a place filled with fear, doubt, and whispering suspicions. Meanwhile, somewhere not too far away, Abigail Hernandez was trapped in a nightmare no one could imagine. What began as a seemingly ordinary missing persons case a teenage girl walking home from school, would become one of the darkest and most disturbing true crime stories to ever unfold in the American Northeast. Abigail's disappearance was not just a shock to her family, it quickly turned into a collective nightmare for the entire town of North Conway. Within hours of the police report, news that a 14-year-old girl had gone missing spread like wildfire across local media. Neighbors who once took pride in their town's safety now began to look at each other with suspicion. Something terrible had happened, and everyone could feel its cold grip creeping through every quiet corner of their peaceful streets. As soon as authorities received the missing persons report, they initiated an emergency protocol. Because Abigail was a minor, her case was given top priority. Investigators began retracing her final steps, from the moment she left school to the point where all contact was lost. Her classmates confirmed that she had parted ways with them at the school bus stop, but instead of boarding the bus, she chose to walk home. Some recalled her saying she wanted to take the scenic route through the park, something she often did before. Police began to search the park, the area believed to be her likely route home. They combed through the area meticulously, scanning for even the smallest clues, footprints, scraps of fabric, personal items, but found nothing. No signs of struggle, no blood, no evidence of dragging. Abby had seemingly vanished into thin air. The last known signal from her cell phone was detected just over a mile from her home. After that, the phone was turned off and was never powered on again. While the police were working the streets, Abigail's family was descending into a state of total despair. Her mother, Xenia, didn't sleep for days. She sat by the phone, staring out the window at every little noise or shadow. Her sister, Sarah, went around town putting up flyers on supermarket bulletin boards, bus stops, and even small corner shops. Abby's face, brown hair, bright eyes, and a beaming smile, quickly became a haunting symbol that blanketed the community. On social media, volunteer groups sprang up within hours. Hundreds joined the search effort, dividing into teams to comb through the dense woods, rivers, abandoned buildings, and even remote hiking trails rarely used. Drones were deployed to capture aerial footage of large areas. But day after day, despite relentless efforts, the result was always the same: nothing. Investigators turned their attention to those closest to Abby, starting with her boyfriend, a 15-year-old boy named Jimmy. As her closest companion at the time, Jimmy was interviewed thoroughly. He was asked whether the two had argued recently, whether he was jealous, angry, or had any reason to hurt her. The smallest hint of irregular behavior could open up a lead. But Jimmy didn't raise any red flags. He was calm, cooperative, and consistent. He told police that he and Abby had plans to meet later that day to study. When she didn't show up, he tried calling but got no answer. At the time Abby went missing, Jimmy was at a school band rehearsal, witnessed by a dozen classmates and a teacher. Later, he attended his grandfather's birthday party, confirmed by multiple family members. Police verified everything. Jimmy had a rock-solid alibi. After clearing him from the suspect list, police expanded their focus to Abby's wider circle. Friends, teachers, neighbors, former hiking club members. Everyone described her as warm, outgoing, and friendly. She wasn't someone who made enemies. No one recalled her being stalked, threatened, or harassed. Though she was fiercely independent and curious by nature, she didn't fit the profile of a runaway or someone easily manipulated. Then something unexpected happened. On November 6, nearly a month after Abigail had disappeared, Xenia opened the family mailbox and found a plain envelope. No postmark, no return address. Inside was a letter. It was Abby's handwriting. Xenia's hands trembled as she read. The letter was short but devastating. Abby said she was alive, safe, and asked her mother to forgive her. She wrote that she was being cared for and ended the note with the cryptic phrase, "Dreams come true." Initially, police feared it was a cruel prank, but handwriting experts confirmed the letter was authentic. It had indeed been written by Abigail. The fact that there was no stamp suggested the letter had been hand-delivered. But by who, and why now? Theories began to swirl. Some suggested Abby had run away willingly, perhaps due to academic pressure or family conflict. Others speculated she might be pregnant, a theory rooted in cruel societal biases that often target teenage girls. Local media ran stories along this angle, fueling even more speculation. and inevitably, backlash. Sarah, Abby's sister, publicly denounced the pregnancy rumor. "If my sister were pregnant, I would have known. We don't keep secrets," she said firmly. Jimmy also came forward, explaining they had never been intimate. Friends close to Abby agreed. She wasn't the type to run away. Her belongings, savings, and all important documents were still at home. Nothing about this pointed to a runaway case. Still, the letter was a flicker of hope in an otherwise dark tunnel. It breathed new life into the case. The FBI formally stepped in and reclassified the incident as a possible abduction. They believed Abby had been coerced into writing the letter and might be in danger. That would explain why she didn't include any details about her location or circumstances. The FBI's behavioral analysts believed Abigail was still alive and likely being held somewhere relatively close to home. This shifted the investigation's focus. Authorities started combing through databases of known offenders, people with previous arrests, individuals living in isolation within a 30-mile radius. But the list of possible suspects was long, and time was running out. Nearly 4 weeks had passed. Hope was starting to fade. Yet somewhere out there, someone was watching the news closely, counting the days and wondering, what should I do next with this girl? At a time when hope was nearly extinguished and people began to fear the worst, a name quietly emerged from the FBI's list of potential suspects: Nathaniel Kibbe. He lived less than 30 kilometers from Abigail's home, tucked away in a remote and wooded area of New Hampshire. With his unkempt hair, distant gaze, and antisocial behavior, he left little impression on those around him, except for an eerie discomfort that kept his neighbors at a distance. Nathaniel Kibbe had shown troubling signs from an early age. As a child, he exhibited extreme behavioral issues and was known to start fights regularly. He kept a revenge list in middle school, filled with names of classmates, teachers, and even relatives, each one crossed out after he'd settled the score. Though he never faced formal charges in his youth, the danger was always there, festering beneath the surface. As an adult, Kibbe continued to operate on the fringes of society. At one point, he was involved in a small local gang known for petty crimes and street violence. Despite multiple arrests for assault, drug possession, and firearm violations, he always managed to walk away with minimal consequences. The justice system, slow and sometimes disjointed, had overlooked the threat he posed. In the spring of 2013, just months before Abigail's disappearance, Kibbe attempted to kidnap a teenage girl at a school bus stop. He pulled up in a car, tried to drag her inside, but the girl fought back fiercely. Her screams drew attention from passersby, and Kibbe fled before anyone could identify him. The case was closed shortly after due to lack of evidence. The victim remained traumatized, but the world moved on, unaware that the same man would soon strike again. On October 9, 2013, the day Abigail vanished, the weather was cool and overcast. She wore her new hiking boots, a gift from her mother for an upcoming trip. But they were too tight, and by the end of the school day, her feet hurt. Rather than take the bus, Abby decided to walk home to break them in. It was a familiar route. What she didn't know was that someone was watching. As she limped through an empty lot behind the park, a beat-up silver pickup truck crept up beside her. Kibbe rolled down the window and offered help. "Need a ride?" he asked gently. Abigail declined, but he didn't drive away. The truck continued to follow slowly. He noticed her limp and asked about her boots. Seeing her discomfort, he pulled over, opened the passenger door, and said, "Come on, I'll get you home before it gets dark." In that moment, Abigail made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Trusting his seemingly kind demeanor, she stepped into the vehicle, unaware she had just entered a predator's trap. At first, Kibbe kept the mood light. He made small talk, joked, and asked questions about school and hobbies. Abby started to relax, but then he made a strange detour. He pulled into a dimly lit parking lot, claiming he needed to grab something for a quick errand. That's when Abby grew uneasy. She told him her house wasn't far, and she could walk the rest of the way. Kibbe's expression changed. As she reached for the door handle, he lunged, grabbed her by the collar, and pulled a handgun from the glove box. "Don't scream. I'll kill you." He zip-tied her hands and feet, shoved a baseball cap over her face to block her vision, and hit the gas. Abigail was trapped, and no one knew. When she regained consciousness, she was locked inside a cramped, windowless shipping container. The air was stale. The smell of rust and sweat filled the space. She screamed, but no one heard. No one could. Kibby returned with duct tape and a motorcycle helmet. He taped her mouth and eyes shut, strapped on the helmet, and ensured she couldn't see or speak. Then he stripped her of her clothes and violated her. From that day forward, Abigail's life became a waking nightmare. Kibby assaulted her repeatedly, physically and psychologically. He threatened to harm her family if she resisted. "If you act up, I'll kill your mom and sister," he warned. Abigail was paralyzed with fear. The first few weeks were a blur of trauma, starvation, and terror. But she realized she needed to survive, and survival meant pretending. She began talking to Kibby, acting compliant. She said she didn't hate him. She said she wouldn't go to the police if he let her go. It was all a lie, but a necessary one. She tried to sneak hidden messages into the letters he forced her to write, but Kibby caught on every time and punished her viciously. After about a month, he began allowing her out of the container. She could shower. She could sit in the trailer and watch TV, always under his supervision. Together, they watched news reports about the search for her. Once, Kibby laughed and said, "They're looking for you just miles from here." Abigail stayed silent, but in her mind, she was memorizing everything. Layout of the trailer, escape routes, his routines. Then things took another turn. Kibby began a counterfeit money operation and forced Abby to help him. She learned how to print, cut, and package fake bills. Her role gave her more time with him, more insight into his methods, and, most importantly, more time to plan. One day, she saw the name Nathaniel Kibby in a magazine article. Taking a risk, she casually called him by that name. Kibby stared at her, then smirked. "How do you know that?" "I saw it in a book," she replied quickly. He didn't say anything else. But from that day, he watched her more closely. What no one knew was that, during this time, police had actually visited Kibby's trailer. After he was caught possessing an illegal firearm, officers arrived with a search warrant. They inspected the trailer, but never checked the shipping container. Abby was inside, so close to rescue, but missed. Kibby was let off with a small fine and had his gun confiscated. He was stunned by how easily he got away with it. The law once again had failed to catch him. Feeling invincible, Kibby grew careless. His routine became predictable. Control, abuse, counterfeit, TV, sleep, repeat. But deep inside, a storm was brewing. He was trapped in a dilemma. Keeping Abby was dangerous. Letting her go was riskier. And the girl he had kidnapped? She was still watching, still waiting, still surviving. She was no longer just a victim. She was becoming a weapon. By mid-July 2014, after more than 9 months locked inside a pitch-black shipping container, Abigail Hernandez had nearly abandoned all hope of escape. Her world had shrunk to a space barely large enough to lie down, and her survival depended entirely on the mood swings of her captor. Despite her mental resilience and multiple failed plans, time kept slipping away. Then, unexpectedly, a woman named Lorraine appeared, becoming the catalyst for a chain of events that would change everything. Lorraine met Nathaniel Kibby at a local bar. They chatted briefly, shared a few drinks, and later went back to his trailer. Neither of them knew that just a few feet away, a young girl was being held captive in silence. During their short time together, Lorraine confided in Kibby about her financial struggles. Unpaid bills, threats of eviction, and barely surviving on a reduced paycheck. Kibby, unusually generous, handed her 2 $50 bills before she left. But the next morning, Lorraine called him, furious. "You gave me fake money. I used it at a store and they're threatening to call the cops," she snapped. Kibby panicked. Lorraine told him she had already spoken to police and given them his address. She said they were planning to return to search his home. The call lasted only a few minutes, but for Abigail, it marked the beginning of the end. Just days later, on July 20th, 2014, Kibby walked into the container. But this time, he wasn't holding duct tape, zip ties, or a weapon. He brought Abigail's backpack, the very one she had when she vanished. Inside were her phone, personal items, and clothes. Without saying much, he zip-tied her hands, led her to his vehicle, and made her a baseball cap pulled low over her eyes to block her vision. Abigail sat in silence, her heart pounding. She didn't know what was happening. Was he going to kill her? Dump her body? Or release her? She stayed quiet, ready to run if an opportunity appeared. The truck drove through familiar roads. When it finally stopped on a deserted rural stretch, Kibby cut her restraints, opened the door, and said flatly, "Get out. And don't even think about going to the cops." Without another word, he sped off, leaving Abigail standing alone in the middle of nowhere. For a moment, she stood frozen, unsure if it was real, or just another trick. She looked around. No houses, no people, only an empty road stretching far into the woods. When no one appeared, she began to walk, first cautiously, then faster. Eventually, she recognized road signs. Her heart leaped. She was free. The walk back home took nearly 2 hours. The entire time, she kept looking over her shoulder, expecting him to return. When she finally reached her neighborhood, she hesitated. Could this really be happening? A home surveillance camera caught her stepping into the house. She looked nothing like the girl who had disappeared 9 months earlier, gaunt, pale, with sunken eyes and tangled hair. Inside, her mother, Xenia, was on the phone. When she heard the door, she turned and froze. "Abby?" she gasped, dropping the phone. The two collapsed into each other's arms, sobbing. 9 months of silence, fear, and despair poured out in that moment. They clung to each other like survivors of a war, but joy quickly gave way to worry. When her mother asked, "Who took you?" Abigail simply shook her head. "I don't know," she whispered. At the police station later that night, she repeated the same story. Not because she had forgotten, but because Kibby's threat still echoed in her mind. "If you go to the cops, I'll come back, and I won't just kill you, I'll kill your mom and your sister too." For an entire week, Abigail lived in constant fear. She didn't leave the house. She didn't open the blinds. She couldn't sleep alone, but slowly, surrounded by love and patience, she began to feel safe. One evening, she quietly told her mother, "I know his name. I remember his license plate." Xenia didn't ask questions. The next morning, they returned to the police station. Abigail told everything: his name, where he lived, the vehicle, the container, the beatings. Every horrific detail. And this time, authorities believed her. Completely. On July 27, 2014, less than 24 hours after receiving her statement, police executed a search warrant on Kibby's property. This time, they didn't just search his trailer, they broke into the container behind it. What they found was chilling. The air was stale. The floor was littered with strands of hair, dried blood, broken nails. There were personal items, zip ties, duct tape, a motorcycle helmet, and sedatives. The container had been soundproofed and converted into a cell, airtight, with no windows or exits. Everything matched Abigail's description. Kibby was arrested on the spot. Shockingly, he didn't resist. He didn't protest. He simply lowered his head in silence. The town was stunned. No one imagined that the man responsible had been living among them, shopping at the same stores, pumping gas, smiling at neighbors. When it was revealed that police had previously visited his property but failed to inspect the container, outrage erupted. In August 2014, Kibby's attorney requested bail. Despite massive public outcry, the court granted conditional release, house arrest, electronic monitoring, and no contact with Abigail or her family. The decision sparked protests. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse, demanding justice. Under growing pressure, the trial was expedited. The court proceedings officially began in December 2014 and stretched into May 2016. During the trial, Abigail faced her captor. She took the stand, voice trembling, but gaze unwavering. "I forgive him," she said, "but I'll never forget. Because of him, I've learned to cherish life and every moment I have with my family." Her mother, Xenia, also spoke. "I hate what he did, but I'm grateful he let her come home." To avoid a life sentence without parole, Nathaniel Kibby pleaded guilty to all charges: kidnapping, assault, sexual abuse, and counterfeiting. He was sentenced to 90 years in prison, with no chance of early release for at least 45 years. After everything she endured, Abigail Hernandez survived. That in itself was a miracle. A 14-year-old girl kidnapped, abused, and held captive inside a shipping container for 9 months, she emerged from the darkness through sheer will and unshakable inner strength. But the emotional scars she carried, and that her family bore, would never fully fade. After the trial, Abigail chose to live a quiet life. She avoided media attention, declined interviews, never wrote a book, and stayed away from social media. The only public message she shared was one of gratitude. for every person who never gave up searching for her. The volunteers who trekked through rivers and forests, the townspeople who quietly posted flyers each day, they were her lifeline. Their hope helped her stay alive long enough to return. Her mother, Xenia, shared in a rare interview. "My daughter didn't come back the same. She came back with cracks in her soul I can't see, can't touch, but I still have her in my arms, and there are so many families who don't get that chance." The Abigail Hernandez case left a deep impression on the American public. It raised serious questions about law enforcement protocols and the urgency with which authorities respond to missing minors. If the container had been searched during the initial police visit, she might have been rescued much sooner. If Kibbe's prior kidnapping attempt had been thoroughly investigated, he might never have had the chance to hurt her. Following the case, several states revised their missing child response policies. Police departments received updated training to handle similar situations more effectively. The federal counterfeit monitoring system was also improved, making it easier to trace criminal activity by individuals with violent records like Kibbe. Today, Abigail is an adult, living quietly with her family in a different location. She is no longer just a victim. She is a survivor, a living testament to the power of human will in the face of unimaginable darkness. Numerous child safety organizations and advocacy campaigns have cited her story as inspiration to raise awareness about abduction, abuse, and survival. But more than anything, Abigail's story is a powerful reminder that evil can exist anywhere, even in communities that seem peaceful and safe. It serves as a wake-up call to parents to be vigilant, to recognize warning signs, and to listen closely to their children. It's also a lesson to society that sometimes one missed step, one moment of hesitation, is all it takes for tragedy to unfold. Abigail didn't return to tell a sad story. She returned to remind us all that hope, when held onto long enough, can save a life.